welcome to our Halloween edition about bats. But just so you know, bats are not scary, they just make for a great Halloween conversation. So stay tuned to learn why we should all love bats and not fear them. I am Marcia Sivek, and this is BeProvided Conservation Radio. When my guest today is not giving bird talks and nature walks with the Yolo Basin Foundation, she is rescuing and rehabilitating bats as well as educating people about bats. Jean Quirk is the founder of Northern California Bats, a rescue and rehabilitation organization near Sacramento Valley, California. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleased to be here. So I go by Corky, it is my nickname, and I am with Northern California Bats, and we do wildlife rescue. So we're taking in bats that are sick, injured, orphaned, try to help them go back into the wild. We also do education programs. We have a small group of bats that are on a permit to be able to take them out so that people can see what a bat is, and learn a little bit more about them, because they're so misunderstood. And they're very small. Bats in California are little animals. Most common comment is, I had no idea they were so small.
I can attest to that because I think I mentioned to you earlier we had two get in our bedroom.
Yes.
A month ago.
They do that sometimes. And I find August is like the peak for bats showing up in the wrong place.
Yeah. Why is that? Maybe food sources or?
No, I think that's teenagers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, many of our bats around here are learning to fly in August, and it's just starting to move away from the adults. And I think they make some mistakes. Whereas now they're showing up in what a human might consider an inappropriate place, but for a bat, it looks like a nice crack or crevice. And so they'll show up like over people's front doors or up in under the eaves or whatever, because we're now in migration.
Okay.
Which is different than showing up in the wrong place, like your bedroom.
Hopefully they got a few mosquitoes out of there anyways. I was just amazed at how small they are and how cute they are. How long have you been doing this? How long have you been working with bats? And can you give us a little background, like why bats?
So in 2004, I took a job with a nonprofit in Davis, Yolo Basin Foundation, and we do wetland education. So I was hired to teach kids about birds and insects and plants and things like that. And then I started learning about the bats at the causeway here in our wildlife area. There's about 250,000 Mexican free-tailed bats that live underneath that bridge.
Wow.
And I've always liked the underdog, and I've always loved flight. And bats have both, right? They're just so misunderstood, and they can fly. And I just think that's really cool. So the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. There was a woman that was contracted in to do some presentations, and she did rescue. So she mentored me, and then she retired, which left this niche. And so in 2006, I started NorCal Bats, and have been running full speed ever since.
Good job. Are you the only one in your organization, or do you operate with volunteers and staff?
We don't have staff. We're all
Okay.
volunteers.
Okay.
And I have about 10 people that are active, that mostly that help with the rescue end. Although I do have a few people that will help me with education programs, especially when we go to events, tabling events.
Yeah, it seems like you do a lot of education and tabling events. That's great. That's probably really helpful that you're able to get back out with public.
It is
Okay.
we did, of course, during the shutdowns, we did some Zoom and that kind of education, but it's just not the same as being able to have a person who maybe has never met a bat before or seen a bat, be able to see some details about it, learn some facts about it, and maybe even overcome some fears.
Yeah, so I was going to ask this a little bit later, but we can talk about it now because you brought it up a couple times about the misconception of bats and how they're misunderstood. What are some of those misunderstandings with people? I know many people are fearful, but why? Do you know?
I think there's a variety of reasons that people are fearful. One is lack of understanding. We tend to be afraid of what we don't see or know. And bats are nocturnal or crepuscular, which is dawn and dusk. And because of that, and our vision isn't good at night, then we end up being afraid. And then there's things out there that aren't completely accurate, maybe somewhat accurate, but not completely. So, for example, there's a lot of fear around rabies. Rabies is a virus that kills mammals, and bats are mammals. So if a bat gets sick with rabies, it will die. And so they're not carriers per se. And then if you never handle the bat, if you don't touch it, even if the bat's sick, you're not exposing yourself. And people also don't really know that. So they think the bat's roosting over my front door. I can't walk in my house because I'm going to get sick. And that's just not the case. And actually, a bat that's roosting up high, living its life, eating insects, probably isn't sick. Granted, probably isn't necessarily good enough. But again, if you don't touch it, there's not an issue.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that was a big problem with COVID, I believe.
It was,
got a bad rap with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, the COVID certainly didn't help the bats any. And especially early on, the media picked up on pieces that weren't complete. And then there were tales that came from that. The virus that the horseshoe bat has in China that is similar to what's causing COVID-19, we actually can't catch. So we can't catch COVID from a bat, even though there are bats out there with a similar virus. And once the media starts putting things out there, it's really hard to take it.
We need more people coming to your education groups, bat education groups. I know it is hard. But it seems, and then they're brought up in the whole Halloween thing as a scary creature of the night, and that they're going to come at you and fly at you and get in your hair and all that.
Unless you have maybe an insect like a mosquito or a moth flying around you, that bat really isn't interested in you. They do swoop to fly. Mm-hmm. So if you happen to be near where they are and they go to take off, that can be a little disconcerting because it feels like it's flying towards you, but it knows exactly where you are. So as long as you're not moving rapidly, that bat's it's going to avoid you.
I want to swat them away.
Yeah, so if you swat at them, then you're knocking into them. They're not knocking into you. And then you may very well injure the bat, and then you got another issue to deal with. If you stay still, then the bat's going to avoid you. They can see with their eyes, and they can use their sonar or echolocation. And so they know exactly where you are. They don't get tangled up in your hair. If you stand up in a cave and put your head up there and knock the bats down, they can get out. They just don't do that. Not that they would even try, but again, it's just not a goal for a bat to attack or to come after us. All bats in the United States and Europe are eating insects, and that's it. We have no vampire bats in the US. We have no fruit-eating bats. We have a couple of species that temporarily migrate into the Southwest deserts and take nectar and pollinate the cactus. We also have none of the meat-eating bats. So the fishing bats and frog bats and bird-eating bats, all of those guys, those are tropical animals.
Okay. I did not know that. So how many different species do we have in our area here in California of bats? I was kind of surprised by looking at your website how many there are. And then in general in the world, it sounds like there's many more.
A lot. Worldwide, there's somewhere between 1,430 to 1,450. The number keeps changing. Wow. And part of that is it changes as we learn more about whether these group of bats are two separate species, or maybe they're not separate and they get recombined or whatever. And part of it is as we explore areas where just haven't been before. Maybe the people of the area know about these new discoveries, but if they haven't been written out in scientific papers, then they would be considered new. Let's say 1,450-ish worldwide. Most are insect eaters. And then you come to the United States, and we have about 45 species here. And in Northern California, it's 16 or 17. So pretty good diversity, 25 to 26 in the state.
Wow. Yeah, I think I counted 17 on your website from the ones that you had listed in your resources. So I was surprised. There's that many.
Yeah.
What's the most common one here in Northern California?
When you get into the Central Valley, which is where I am,
Yeah.
the Mexican free-tailed bats outnumber everybody.
Okay.
And they love the heat. They love the rivers. And we have the Sacramento, San Joaquin River, the Delta area, and then all, of course, the tributaries that come in. And they're a fascinating bat. They love to live in massive groupings. So like the Yolo Causeway here in Davis has about 250,000.
Oh, wow.
Which is, it's a 3-mile bridge.
So
they're pretty
live underneath there? Yeah.
They do. They live up in the little crevices in the bridge.
Okay.
And then they also are a species that don't mind people very much. Some species are terrified of us and they tend to move out when we move in. But other species are like, the human built a building. Maybe there's a crevice for us to hide in. And Mexican free-tailed bats are one of those. So they'll live in our buildings, our parking garages. They'll form groupings in palm trees. They're in many places. And because their colony sizes, we tend to notice them too.
Yeah, that's quite a number underneath the causeway.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're in many other bridges too. That's just one bridge,
that we know of. Yeah.
But when we look around here, some of these groupings are big enough to pick up on Doppler radar.
Oh my gosh, great.
And then when you get into places like Texas, those numbers take huge leaps into the hundreds of thousands to the millions. And that kind of says something also about the insect load in Texas.
So how big are these Mexican free-tailed bats? Are they like our size of our hand, or?
Their body is around the size of my thumb.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They weigh 10 to 12 grams. So it takes, 3 of them to make an ounce. But their wingspan is pretty impressive. They have about a 12 or 13 inch wingspan, and they're also amazingly fast. The little Mexican free-tailed bats are the fastest mammal. They beat the cheetah. Everybody talks about the cheetah. Yep. Cheetahs are fast. But Mexican free-tailed bats are at just under 100 miles an hour.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah, you never hear about that.
Super fast.
Yeah.
Super fast. They can hunt 2 miles high if they decide they want to go up and catch the migrating, but they can also be down low. They'll eat mosquitoes. They'll eat little beetles. They have a rather diverse diet.
That's terrific. So them being so fast, what kind of predator do they have?
It's tough to catch a Mexican a bat that's flying fast, right?
Yeah.
So most of the time, the predators are animals that can figure out where the bat sleeps during the day. Okay. And then they wait at the exit point. So if the bats are up in the palm fronds, then an animal that can climb a palm tree might just wait for the bats to wake up. And as they drop to fly out, they can get caught.
Oh, wow.
Or if they're under the eaves of a house, there's animals that'll sit on the roof. In the air, peregrine falcon.
I was going to say that would be my first guess because they're fast.
Yeah, they're amazing.
Yeah.
I've also seen Swainson's hawks catch them. But you also have to realize falcons and hawks are daytime animals. So there's really only a little bit of crossover time.
That's
where
true.
Those birds are able to see well enough to catch the bat.
Oh, gotcha. That makes sense. Let's talk about bat numbers. Have you seen a change in numbers of bats in the last few years? A decrease, increase?
Bats are on a decline, just like most wildlife. Habitat loss, of course, but also insecticide use. And we just can't underestimate what we're doing with the use of pesticides.
Right.
Not only do we kill their food, but we also, the residue on those insects that don't die then get consumed, and that can affect the brain. And it affects us too, as well as many other things we depend on. Insects are food for the fish, the reptiles, the birds, the mammals.
I believe there's been some studies done that show that bats are actually saving some farmers a lot of money.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Do you have any numbers on that? Like how?
Yeah,
I would assume
I've
billions of
seen
dollars or something.
it's
Yeah.
billions with a B.
Yeah.
Across the US annually. I've seen anywhere from 23 to 35 billion. A lot of that is reduced pesticide use because pesticides, not only are they not healthy, but they're also expensive,
Mhm.
and reduced crop loss.
Oh, yeah. Makes sense. It'd be so much more inexpensive to put up a few bat houses in a field than,
It would be. They're
Yeah.
not going to eat all the insects. If you're
Yeah.
an organic farmer, for example, or an organic gardener, and you put up and attract bats in, they will reduce the quantity of insects, but you're still going to have some insects eating, but that's not all bad.
Yeah.
And there's a balance in our planet. The other thing bats can do, which I think is interesting, is there are moths who can hear or feel the vibrations of echolocation.
Moths can do this.
Yeah, there are
Okay.
certain species
Okay.
of moths that can. And so if there are bats in the area, those moths leave. So not only does the bat eat the insect, but it also just flat drives them away.
Oh, wow. That's cool. I never
Cool.
heard of that. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to learn about these little guys. And as far as their numbers go, I was also surprised to learn that they don't really mass reproduce, right? They don't. Do most of them just have one baby a year or two babies a year?
Most species have one baby. We call a baby bat a pup.
A pup? Okay.
So most species have one pup. There are a few that can have twins. And then our outlier is the western red bat, which is a solitary tree species, and they'll often have 3 or 4. But the predation rate, when you live by yourself hanging in a tree like a piece of fruit, the predation rate is much higher. So survival, their wildlife, one baby once a year, usually. So if we do the math, bats are long-lived. They might live 15 years. They might live even longer, depending on the species. Little brown bat's been known to live into its 30s.
Wow.
But I want to do the math on 10 years because I can do that. They'll have their first pup around the age of 2, which means they'll have 8 pups in their lifespan. Wildlife life expectancy for that first year is about 25%. So that means 2 pups grow up to become adults and reproduce. That means that bat has replaced herself and the male, and the colony size stays stable. If she lives longer, she may add to the colony size. But if something devastating happens to that colony, whether it be human caused or other, it's not going to recover, or at least not in our lifetimes. And so the other disease that we're really worried about is a fungus that it's called white nose syndrome. White nose syndrome is caused by a fungus that came from Eurasia, and our bats don't have any resistance. And what happens is they get this fungus on themselves, and it's an irritant. So it causes them to wake up too often during hibernation.
Okay.
And they starve to death in the wintertime. It was first identified in New York State, and it's been making its way across the United States. And in 15 years, we now have at least 2 species that have gone from very common to now being proposed for federal endangered species listing.
Oh, wow.
Just devastating in some. Little brown bat and the northern long-eared bat, the tricolored bat, they're all hugely suffering. The smaller this bat and the longer they hibernate, the more likely they're not to survive.
Wow. So I have 2 questions on that too. That's really sad. I've heard of the white nose syndrome before. So I always think of that as an East Coast thing. Is that starting to move its way westward towards us?
For sure.
Okay.
It is now identified it's here. It's in California. It hasn't been identified in Sacramento or Yolo counties, which is where I am. It hasn't been identified in Santa Cruz yet, but it is in Plumas County, Chester.
Okay.
And also, I want to say Riverside, although I'm not positive that's the right county, but there's a Southern California county as well. So really concerning. And it's spread in multiple ways. Certainly bats spread it as they move from one location to another, maybe during their migration times, but we spread it too. When we go in and out of roosting locations without properly cleaning our shoes and our clothes, we're carrying the spores with us from place to place.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So really, it couldn't get from Eurasia to New York on its own. That's humans.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the jump between the Midwest to Washington State also was a huge jump that had to have been human.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I didn't realize it was already on the western edge or the coast.
Yeah. So the DNA of the fungus has been found here. So far, we haven't had any bats that we know of that have succumbed to white nose syndrome. So we don't know whether our climate is different enough that maybe our bats won't be affected in quite the same way.
Maybe dry.
Yeah, it's also a cold-loving fungus that affects bats that hibernate for an extended period of time.
Okay.
And there's so much we don't like. How long do bats in California hibernate?
Yeah, that was my other question that I was going to ask on the hibernation. I didn't know if we had any hibernating bats here.
We do up in the mountains.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How long? And you don't know how long they hibernate, it sounds like. Okay.
No.
Wow. So
There's more research though.
Is there? That's coming.
Yeah.
To be done or is being done?
Both.
Oh, okay.
That's the upside, I guess you could say, of white nose syndrome is because suddenly we're losing our bats.
Yeah.
Money became available to find out what we have and how to stop it or slow it down. And so now there's more bat research being done, and maybe we'll answer some of those questions that we just flat out didn't know.
Always something to learn, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Do bats migrate north, south, or east, west at all in this area?
That's another one we don't know for sure. Okay. Every time we seem to think we know, then we learn something else. I think that many of them actually are doing an east-west migration rather than a north-south. So you get a name like Mexican freetail, and the assumption is they're going to Mexico. But it seems that the ones that live in Northern California don't leave the state. The ones that are farther south, some of them likely are going to Mexico and back. Others maybe aren't leaving the other states either. And the technology is getting there. So I really think in the next few years, we're going to have some of those answers.
Oh, that'd be interesting. I wanted to ask a little bit about you rescuing bats and how do they come into your care, and how videos of you with little tiny bats in your hands. And that has to be, they're so delicate, it seems, and to handle them has to be a little bit scary, I would think.
Yeah, it was scarier at first.
Yeah.
I don't worry quite as much as I've learned that they're a little bit sturdier than you might think by looking at them.
Yeah.
Babies, I worry a little bit more about, especially some of our smaller species of bat. California bat is quite tiny. The canyon bat is another very tiny bat, but Mexican freetails and big brown bats and some of those guys, a little sturdier than you might think.
Yeah. How do they come into your care? How do you get a bat to come into your rescue and rehab?
Yeah, people sometimes find wildlife that's injured or acting in a way that they think it needs help. So usually when they find us, it's because they've done some kind of a Google search for wildlife rescue having to do with bats. And there's various groups around that will take care of bats. So we cover about a 5-county area. If the people that call are out of my area, there's not a lot of bat people. So usually we know who to refer you to.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
so,
my next question.
And then, we evaluate them, see what's up, see if they're injured or not, if they're young or not, and if they need veterinarian care. We have a veterinarian that we will bring the bat to, and she'll do what she can for it. I have medication if needed. Sometimes a wing is injured. She might have to splint it or set it, things of that sort. And then hopefully we can get it healthy enough to go into the flight cage so that it can build back up its strength and live its life.
Gotcha. So what is the success rate, especially with a broken wing or something like that, to be able to
Broken wings are tough.
released back
Yeah,
out?
I don't think I can give you a percentage on a broken wing, but it's not great. It's tough. A lot of those bats end up one way or another staying in permanent care. Although some of them we can get back out in the wild. Horn wings, skin heals, and so that's good.
Oh, good.
Our return rate is around 40%.
Okay.
About 40% of the bats that come into care are able to be released. A lot of the other 60 don't survive at all due to one reason or another.
Yeah, I mean, it still seems pretty good. I've talked to bird rehabbers too, and it's hard for success rate for birds is not extremely high either being
Right.
released. And a couple of your videos, I saw that you're actually like, how do you feed a little baby mammal like that? And I saw that you have a little Q-tip or something.
It's actually an eyeshadow applicator.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
They suck on that for.
Yeah, so we put the formula on the eyeshadow applicator, and then they suck, and we just keep dripping the formula onto the little sponge until their tummy gets full.
Oh, wow. So how long are they on a formula like that before they start going to get bugs on their own and things?
There's a transition, and there would be in the wild as well, where they're on the formula. It varies with species, but anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
And then we begin to feed them insects and supplement with formula. So think about if you have a baby and you're raising it, you don't go breast milk, solid food, right? You have a transition in there where the baby is eating some solid food, but is continuing to nurse. So they get that. And after about 8 weeks-ish, they're done with formula. They're hopefully eating insects. And we also teach them to eat from a bowl so that we don't have to hand feed them every night. And once they can do that, then it makes it much easier also to get them out in the flight cage.
Okay. So can they adapt to humans pretty well?
They never really care much about us.
Okay.
So that's the upside to working with bats versus certain kinds of other mammals and some of the birds.
Yeah.
They will habituate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bats don't habituate. They know who we are, but if they can get away, they're absolutely happy to leave.
Yeah. So do you just try to release them in the same area? Will they find a colony? If you have 1 or 2 bats you're releasing, they'll go and find their own colony pretty successfully, or?
So if they come to us as an adult, then they go back to where they came from.
Gotcha.
If they come to us as a pup, then often they're raised with other pups of their species. And hopefully we also have at least one adult of their species so that they can also learn to speak the right language. They will be released into a known colony together. Because they're raised together, they know each other. And usually the majority of the pups that we get into care, the majority are Mexican free-tail bats. On the other side is if we're able to get a baby back with its mom right away, of course, a bat can raise her baby better than I can raise her baby. And so we do also try to do some reuniting.
Oh, nice. How can we help in our backyard getting bat numbers up and protecting bats?
So there's some real basic things we can do. One is not using pesticides. And then along with that, if you can plant native plants, especially ones that are bloom nocturnal, because that attracts the nocturnal insects, and that's what bats eat. They do drink water. So if you have a water source, that's great. If you have a swimming pool or you have water troughs for large animals, say a horse trough, it's good to put a wildlife ramp in because especially during drought, wildlife go to those water sources and most things can swim. Bats can swim.
Oh, I didn't know
they
that.
fall in,
Yeah.
but they can't climb the side of the pool. So with the wildlife ramp, they're able to get out. Bat houses are another way to provide safe places for them to roost. And a bat house is flat. It can be multiple chambers, but they're separate. The boards are separated usually by a 1x. So they're about 3/4 of an inch wide, each chamber, and openings at the bottom. And bats, they've lost a lot of habitat. So sometimes they move into human structures and sometimes they get chased out. And then they may move into another human structure and get chased out of there. And if they hit the bat house, they no longer are getting chased out.
Right.
So not only does it benefit the homeowner because they have insect control, it also benefits the bats.
That makes sense. We have 2 bat houses here, but I think I learned on your website today that I may have put them in the wrong place. I have them kind of east, south facing, but they're high up on a tree. And I think you recommended to not have them on a tree.
Get it out of the tree.
Yeah. So move it to maybe like the side of a barn or something like that.
Side of a barn is lovely.
Okay.
If the barn is tall enough.
Okay.
It needs to be at least 10 feet up. 12 and higher is better. East or south, those are both good. They like about 6 hours of morning sun.
Okay.
The problem with trees are twofold. One, too much fluctuation of temperature because there's shade.
Okay.
The other is predators. There are bats that live in trees. There's bats that live under bark. So you would think they would go in a bat house.
Yeah.
But those bats regularly move. They don't form a colony and stay, because if they stay put under the bark, some predator is going to figure it out.
Yeah, I'll have to move mine because both of them they're high up on a tree. And I do see woodpeckers hanging about up there too, which probably isn't good.
Yeah, it's amazing what'll get a bat. The squirrel will get a bat if it can. Jays and crows sometimes injure bats. We talked about the birds of prey. Cats.
Yeah.
That's probably number one broken bone from cats.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you probably have some of the pups falling from the house. Sometimes
you have that too.
Yeah. And but cats and stuff can get them.
Yeah, these are not pups. These are adult bats.
Oh, wow.
Cats are catching.
They are.
And yeah, I don't know how exactly they catch them. My guess is it's when they're exiting.
Yeah. Standing there with their mouths open, ready to go.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Oh my. How can we help organizations like you? And how can people find you and get more involved?
Sure. Education's huge. We do a lot of programs. We do schools and libraries and festivals. So, if you share the word so that we can get out to more places, that's great. And we also do them by Zoom. So I know some people are not nearby. I'm doing a library show in Colorado, except I'm not going to Colorado. So that's fun.
Yeah.
And then other people.
Yeah.
That's also huge. We do have a spot for donations. We have an Amazon wish list. Honestly, the vet bills are probably our biggest, because just if you took your pet to the vet, it costs. And most of the time when we're taking a bat, it's surgery. So it's anesthesia and there's multiple people involved. That's our biggest cost.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. And that brings me, how many bats do you usually get in that you have to care for?
Yeah, we have about 200 a year that come through.
That's quite a bit. So is there a certain season that is really busy for you?
I would say summer is our busiest because of the pups.
Okay.
But we get them year round. Our weather here in the Sacramento area is pretty temperate. So we have bats all year. And so they're coming in conflict with one thing or another. One that they have issue with, aside from cats, are fly strips.
Oh,
yeah.
Those are nasty.
They are. It's a terrible death. It's really hard to save a bird or a bat that's wrapped itself up in a fly strip. Yeah. Fly strips don't belong outside. But if for some reason you have to put them outside, you can put them inside like a hardware cloth cage or even an old bird cage.
Oh,
so
that's smart. Yeah.
The birds and bats cannot get to them. Hummingbirds get caught in them. Swallows get caught in. It's bad.
Yeah.
But the flies can still get in through the caging. So, if you have to put them outside for some reason, protect them so that the animals don't get to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's good. That's a good tip. I haven't thought of that before. Yeah, I don't like those either. I used to work in bird rescue and a lot of birds. It was sad.
It is.
But,
yeah. And it's so hard to clean the fur and feathers.
Yeah.
And then they groom it. So then they get it inside.
It's not a good situation at all. And I was going to ask, your website, is that norcalbats.org that people can look you up at?
Yes, norcalbats. north.org.
North,
We have information about the species of Northern California, information about bat houses and placement, and about our various programs. And we also have a calendar. So if you want to come out and see us someplace, that would be how you could find us.
Oh, terrific. Yeah, your calendar is pretty busy right now, I saw. So congratulations on that. And is there anything else you would like us to know about bats and what you want us to walk away with as your message about bats today?
I hope people get outside and appreciate them. I often have people, there's no bats near me, but they're out there. If there are insects, there are bats out there eating those insects. Appreciate them for what they do. They're amazing animals. They're quite beautiful. When you see them up close, they're furry. They have little faces like dogs and cats, and they're doing quite a service. They're not dangerous. They're not out there to hurt us. They don't attack. You can use their guano as fertilizer. We didn't talk about that, but
oh, that's true.
It's great fertilizer. So many benefits of having bats around.
Terrific. I know, I love bats, and I was happy to see the two that, even though they got in my bedroom, I was like, yay, they're here. They got out safely, by the way. Yeah, so with that, I know we talked about a lot of things, that the challenges and such, but you seem very hopeful, or just what gives you hope with caring for these bats?
I talk a lot to children, and I guess I have hope because I can see that in those children. I can see that they are also looking to their future and wanting to make a difference, not just for themselves, but also for the planet. It's in their hands, but many of them seem to really want and care, and hopefully they do make a difference.
I love that. Yeah, and it's nice that you're able to see their faces light up when they're maybe watching the birds come out from the causeway, or the bats and the, yeah.
Both, yeah. We were out today looking at the ducks with a bunch of kids, and
oh yeah, they're migrating in now too.
They are, yeah. The bats are becoming docile, and the birds are becoming active, and nice. Yeah.
That's always exciting. Good. I know it's the younger generation. They're going to have to help protect all our wildlife. So,
yep, they sure are. They sure are.
Thanks, Corky, for your time. I really appreciate it. And I hope that we stay in touch. And I hope I can get to one of your events one of these days. So.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I would love that.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you so much. Well, this concludes today's show. So happy Halloween, everyone. I hope you have a fun and a little spooky Halloween in a jovial way. I am Marcia Sivek, and this is BeProvided Conservation Radio. You can find Corky's information at norcalbats.org. It's a great resource for all things bats, and I will have her information link of her website and a couple of photos of Corky and some bats that you can find at beprovided.com. This interview was conducted over Zoom, and the music today is titled A Spooky Night by Material Girl, downloaded from soundcloud.com. Thank you again, everyone. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and stay healthy.